National security is making its way onto the campaign trail, but if the Republican 2016 field can't stand up to Donald Trump, how will they stand up to ISIS? That is not something I said. That was the message in a tweet from Republican presidential candidate George Pataki on Thursday. And Pataki isn't the only one reacting to blowback over Trump's dicey immigration remarks. This weekend featured a gaggle of Republican presidential hopefuls and a kaleidoscopic range of responses.
I salute Donald Trump for focusing on the need to address illegal immigration.
The comments he made were inappropriate and have no place in the race, even though I like him.
Donald Trump does not represent the Republican Party. I was offended by his remarks.
People who are coming illegally obviously are coming with a bad intent. Let's just be honest. They're coming in with the clear intent of breaking the law.
To make these extraordinarily ugly kind of comments is not reflective of the Republican Party. We're going to win when we're hopeful and optimistic and big and broad rather than, you know, just angry all the time.
Okay, Eugene, here's my question, and I don't understand this. Donald Trump made those remarks 3 weeks ago. In the time that has elapsed, Univision has basically cut off contact on June 25th. This place, NBC Universal, June 29th. Macy's, July 1st. Serta, which I believe is still a mattress company, July 1st. And now, only after the mattress company has weighed in, is the Republican presidential field beginning to figure out that this is a problem.
It takes a while. It takes a while.
It was also NASCAR as well.
Yes, NASCAR was July 3rd.
You kind of wonder, like, what's going on? Because there were, I mean, I spoke with Republicans, you know, Republican strategists and people in the party who were immediately alarmed and whose hair was on fire as Trump was saying this stuff. So it's not like they didn't notice and didn't know. They just had to kind of figure out.
And then get those responses. I mean, what do you make of those responses, Jillian?
I think it's extraordinary. I mean, the Republicans right now have got a big problem with the Latino community. How are they going to get the Latino votes? That's a crucial question in many ways of the election.
But can I just interrupt? I think young people hear that, regardless of whether they're Latino, and think that's an awful thing to say about an entire race of people. I mean, that has nothing to do with the color of your skin. That just seems wildly intolerant.
I agree. Well, the other issue, bigger issue, is the one that Jeb Bush pointed to, which is how does the Republican Party move from seeming to be the angry party towards a party of vision and positivity? How does it show it actually has a heart and cares? And that's a much bigger challenge than anything that Donald Trump has
because it requires developing a positive vision
exactly.
of the future.
Yeah, I mean, George Will, Sam Stein, you're still with us. It's going to be a much better show for that. George Will tweeted this, and I think he has a point. He calls Trump a one-man Todd Akin, because while Todd Akin was not sort of directing the Republican Party, he certainly directed the narrative for a couple of very, very, very bad weeks there. I mean, Donald Trump retweeted this. It has since been deleted. Jeb Bush has to like the Mexican illegals because of his wife. Now, Donald Trump didn't write that, but he retweeted that, and then he deleted that. But the fact is, that's now in the groundwater.
Well, I suppose this follows a pretty conventional path in terms of the current media landscape, which is something totally outrageous is said, totally offensive. It simmers there for a little bit. Everyone is forced to react to it in the same party, and then it suddenly becomes a news cycle unto itself. I will say this about Serta being ahead of the other Republican presidential candidates. I'm not surprised by this development at all. If you recall in Indiana during the Religious Freedom Act debate, when Mike Pence signed that law, it was the corporate response that came before the political response there, where a bunch of corporations said, no, you can't allow this type of discrimination against gays in the state. We don't want to do business with your state if that's the case. It was only then that the politicians reacted. And I think that is something that we see a lot, where corporate America, at least with respect to the Republican Party, is much more socially progressive than the lawmakers.
Yeah, but I think there's also the question about where the Republican base is at, because if you look at the polling, there is not overwhelming support for a path to citizenship among the Republican base. 46%, this is likely Iowa Republican caucus participants, believe they should be, that illegal immigrants, those here without papers, should be required to leave. That's 11 million men, women, and children. I think we have Steve Kornacki. Do we have our very own Steve Kornacki, host of Up, with us? Can we show Steve Kornacki? Perhaps not yet. Yes, we do. Steve, I mean, when we talk about, thank you for joining us, Steve. When we talk about, where the party goes in the primary part of this process, those numbers say that Donald Trump is maybe giving voice to a very certain part of the base.
Yeah, and it raises the question, too. You think ahead about a month from now to that first Republican presidential debate, and Donald Trump, by those poll numbers, will be one of the 10 who gets the invitation to appear on stage on that debate. It'll probably come at the expense of a pretty credible, other candidate. Somebody like John Kasich might get left out, Rick Santorum might get left out, so that Donald Trump can debate. And you play this ahead. You play this debate we're seeing play out right now ahead to that debate, and it's going to create some interesting moments, because you're going to have Donald Trump, who is channeling sort of the guts of a good chunk of the Republican base, a good chunk of the conservative base. He's going to be up there giving expression to that in a very sort of aggressive way, and he's going to be forcing these candidates. He's going to be forcing Jeb Bush in particular to address what he's saying directly. And the thing about Donald Trump is we can always sit here and say, we don't think he's really going to be the nominee at the end of this. We don't think he really has a chance of winning. But his conduct on that stage, what he forces the other candidates to say on that stage, could have a lot to say about who does win in the end.
Steve, why is Ben Carson number 3 in the latest Republican polling average? I mean, I think we talk about folks who have name recognition. We talk about people who are sort of larger than life figures on the national stage. Jeb Bush, Scott Walker, Ben Carson is polling above Marco Rubio, Rand Paul, Mike Huckabee, Ted Cruz, Rick Perry, Chris Christie. What do you attribute that to?
I think two things. One is you just think about how information sort of gets out there these days. We have, in a lot of ways, partisan media right now. And if you look at the sort of conservative media, the Republican media that's out there, this might have escaped the attention of a lot of people sort of outside that universe. But within that universe, Ben Carson made himself sort of a folk hero about 2 or 3 years ago when he was at the National Prayer Breakfast. That's that annual event in Washington. The president, Democrat or Republican, annually attends it. Barack Obama was there that day, and Ben Carson was sort of the featured speaker at that event. And at that event, Ben Carson basically got up there with Barack Obama sitting right next to him, right to his side, and Ben Carson ripped into the Obama administration. It made him a folk hero on the right, and there's nobody on the right criticizing Ben Carson.
It is, the folk hero thing, that narrative is so strong in these early primary states. We talk about Chris Christie, the liability of Bridgegate. The thing, apparently, if you listen to the polling, the thing that is hurting Chris Christie the most is the hug he had with President Obama after Hurricane Sandy.
Exactly. I mean, it sounds crazy, but look, all the candidates have to pay what is really inordinate attention to the most conservative group of Republican voters, likely Iowa caucus goers, right? I mean, those are really, really conservative people, and so they can't just kind of blow these people off if they hope to do at all well in Iowa.
You cannot maybe lose the primary to win the general, Jeb Bush. But we'll see. We have to leave it there. Sam Stein, Eugene Robinson, Jillian Tett, and Steve Kornacki, thank you guys all for your time and extraordinary patience.